Bumrah picked up an injury to his left knee while fielding in the second ODI against England in Cardiff. He was immediately ruled out of the Lord's decider, took an injection to the knee as part of the BCCI medical team's long-term fitness plan, spent weeks in rehab at the BCCI Center of Excellence. The medical team advised him not to rush back as it could potentially aggravate the issue and risk an extended layoff. Failed his fitness test, and so now India head into Galle against Sri Lanka, one of the most spin-friendly surfaces on the planet, against one of the best spin attacks without their best bowler. Again, this is the third series now in a row that something's happened to Bumrah in terms of injury. So the question is no longer when Bumrah comes back. The question is whether India can win without him. Welcome back to the In Between Overs podcast. We're your host of the day, Sway. I'm Taran.
And I'm Ishaan.
So we're 5 days away from the first test in Galle, which starts on August 15th. We're excited to be watching Test cricket again. It seems like we've had a bit of a break. Before we dive into the big debate about India winning the series without Bumrah, a quick 60-second recap of what's been going on in world cricket. So as we discussed, Bumrah ruled out of the Sri Lanka Test due to that injury. Aqib Nabi comes in place of him, a much well-deserved call-up to the Indian team. I believe he was in the Afghanistan match as well. I can't remember if he played, but yeah, good to see him back. Sai Sudharsan's ruled out as well, so he picked up an injury. Looks like he got a toe stress fracture. So he's going to be sitting at the game as well, which means India selects another replacement, and Sarfaraz Khan finds his way back into the team after last playing in that whitewash against New Zealand a couple of years ago now. Also missing, other injuries to speak of, Harshad Rana, hamstring, Nitish Kumar, quadriceps, Akashdeep looks like he's got some stress in his back. Washi Sundar picked up an injury as well in that ODI series. So a lot of India's first string test players are missing, which is going to be interesting to see how the rest go in this series. And then on a positive note, a return to injury for Ravi Jadeja, comes back from his tennis elbow, so he'll slot back in, I'm sure. And then, as you said, Washi's out, so there's going to be Saransh Jain, who's making his debut or his first maiden call-up for the Indian team. Don't know if he's going to actually play. There's also Manav Sitar in the team. We'll discuss that in a minute. India also played a tour match against the Sri Lankan 11 to get, I guess, acclimatized to the conditions. They ended up winning that match. There's a funny video on Twitter of Siraj hitting 3 sixes in the final over to win that game. It's pretty funny. Everyone's smiling. Gautam Gambhir with a nice big smile at the end. So that was a good match in terms of testing out different players. So we'll talk about that as well. And then in the other part of the world, in England, we've been covering the whole drama around Stokes' retirement, Baz getting dropped as a test coach, and then England searching for a new test coach and captain. They ended up selecting Stephen Fleming, which we'll talk more about, and then Root is now confirmed as returned to captaincy at least till next Ashes. So that's going to be interesting. All right, so let's dive into the debate. Can India win the Sri Lanka Test series without Bumrah? Is his absence a genuine crisis for India?
Big question. I'm going to say no, not for this tour. I think, maybe it's if Bumrah was to get injured, maybe a tour in Sri Lanka, test tour in Sri Lanka, I wouldn't say it's the end of the world. Now, obviously, Bumrah coming into the squad, it does make the fast bowling that much better. And, as you rightly pointed out in your opening monologue, obviously India ridiculed with a lot of injury throughout. So a lot of their fast bowling unit is, a mix of inexperience, I would say mostly inexperience, and a few, I would say, experienced players, but maybe not first-string bowlers, so to say. So it'll be interesting there to see from a fast bowling department. But yeah, Bumrah would definitely be missed from an X-Factor perspective. So again, not too sure how much the fast bowlers will have an impact in Sri Lanka. We all know they definitely do. But I think India is definitely going to feel it from an experience perspective. I think that's where India is going to take a hit. Now, we know India has been on the back foot recently, looking back, obviously coming out with some latest victories, but still coming back from more recent losses. I think India's definitely going to be on the back foot. This is a test series they want to win and they should win. But I think Bumrah will have an impact, but I don't think it's going to be materially enough to derail the series in my eyes.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think with the conditions in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka being a spin friendly destination, I don't see the fast bowlers having that much of an impact. Then again, you're talking about Jasprit Bumrah, right? One of the greatest fast bowlers. Some even argue he can be viewed as like a fast spinner in a way, in the way that sometimes he gets movement off the pitch as well, right? So it's going to be a big loss, as he is with every match that he doesn't play in. But that just means that the other bowlers get to step up. And we all know how Mohammad Siraj is going to be. And he's going to relish the opportunity of leading the attack again. So, and I feel that with the way Sri Lanka generally prepares their pitches, they generally prepare for their spinners. And so I feel that India may end up playing one fast bowler the entire series. And that'll probably be Mohammad Siraj. We'll talk about 11s. So yeah, it'll definitely be an impact. I think the Sri Lankan batsmen are probably the happiest here, not having to face Bumrah, no matter what state the ball is in. He always creates havoc, always asks questions of the batsman's techniques and things of that nature. So I think Sri Lanka will be very happy. And it might be a very competitive series because of that. I think it still will, because you're talking about an Indian Test team that hasn't had the greatest record of late. You were talking about they should still come out of this with a win. I don't know about that. What I do know is they need to win this in order to stay in contention for the WTC final. But I don't think it's going to be as easy playing playing in Sri Lanka against the Sri Lankan spin bowling attack. They have Prabhat Jayasuriya, who's very much like a Rangana Herat, maybe a little taller, and he's had good success on these pitches. So it all comes down to how the batters are able to play against the Sri Lankan spinners.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. India obviously on the back foot with some of their most recent experience. And to your point, it does definitely fall upon the spinners. And to your point, India may just play, a one fast bowler. So now looking at sort of the bowling options there, who are you looking at to see is leading from the front? Obviously, you mentioned Siraj. He's going to step up, being that more experienced fast bowling option there. But Jaddu being back is super important. And we saw Kuldeep as well in the warm-up match, getting some revs in. So I think it's going to be exciting to see how Kuldeep and Jadeja pull up in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I think the two of them are going to be playing for sure, and then it's a toss up between whether you want to play two fast bowlers or three spinners. So you probably have Manav Sitar slot in there if it's a spin friendly pitch. And maybe we should walk through the 11. I feel like maybe there is room for three spinners and two fast bowlers, right? So if we quickly go through the 11. So you have KL Rahul and Jaiswal at the top, right? One down. Well, this is going to be interesting with Sai Sudharsan out. Do you see Padikkal coming in as a straight swap for Sai Sudharsan, given his 142 as well in the warm-up?
I do. I do. I think Gautam Gambhir trusts Padikkal. I see Padikkal coming in at number 3.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you there. I see Padikkal coming in. Actually, I think Sarfaraz will be like the backup batsman for the entire series. I think he only gets a shot if someone else gets injured. Yeah, Padikkal at 3. So then at number 4, you have Gill. Almost forgot about him. You have Mr. Skipper himself at number 4. Number 5, Rishabh Pant. Number 6, Number 6 would be Jurel. Jurel would be at 6, right? And then number 7, you have Jaddu. Already they swap, right? Jaddu may come in at 6 as well. So you have Jurel at 6, Jaddu at 7. So there's your first all-rounder. So now you pick four bowlers. So you're probably going to take another all-rounder at 8. So you're playing Manav Sutar, right? As a swap for Washi. Or maybe they go Saransh Jain, because Saransh Jain is an off-spinning all-rounder. But I believe Manav Sutar is slightly better with the bat, and he's already debuted, so he has some experience already under his belt. So maybe they go him at 8. I think it's a toss-up between him and Saransh Jain. And then 9 would be Kuldeep, right? And then you play 2 fast bowlers. So I guess you're playing Siraj for sure. And then it's a toss-up between Gurnur Brar, Prasid Krishna, and Akib Nabi.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a 11 that should not be a surprise to a lot of people. I think that probably makes the most sense. It'll be interesting as well from who they'll select from a fast bowling department, because I think to your point, they will include an additional fast bowler there to accompany Siraj. Now, I think they will end up sticking with Prasad Krishna, but it'll be interesting to see, do they stick with Prasad Krishna and how he performs, because, you do have Gurnu Barar as well, and you do have the newly called up Akim Nabi. So I think it'll be definitely very interesting to see from a bowling perspective who India picks as their second fast bowler. But I think from the 11 though, we look at when we went through 1 to 11. I don't think too many surprises. Again, I think we've been talking a lot about the bowling. If we spend maybe 30 seconds on the India's batting, I think it's really much ado about nothing. I think, as you pointed out, the big contentious item is who will be coming at number 3, one down. I think it shall be Padikkal, but I think everything else is pretty straightforward from a batting department.
Yeah, from a batting perspective, it is pretty straightforward. I don't see any changes apart from number 3. It sucks for Sai Sudharsan. I think these pitches in Sri Lanka would have really showed his technical technical skill, because he's that type of batter that can play on these type of conditions. But hey, if someone is not able to or is injured, then it gives an opportunity to someone else, right? And Padikkal grabbed it with two hands. Like that was a fantastic 100 that he made. It couldn't have been at a better time for him. I think he slots right into that number 3 spot. And I feel you have a like for like there. And I feel for Sai, because if Padikkal puts up some sort of scores, I can't see Sai Sudarshan coming back unless Padikkal fails.
And that's one of those things that we always talk about, especially not only in international cricket, but in test cricket, where if you're given opportunities, you haven't really grabbed the opportunities with both hands, cementing your spot, you get injured, you get a niggle. If someone comes in and has 2 or 3 performances, unfortunately, the way that cricket is, they still stick with that person up until they fail or, they get out of form.
Yeah. Going back to the batting, the series is going to be is going to tell us a lot about this core, and especially Jurel at 6. I think his position seems to always be up in conversation as well, because he's still building his spot there as a batter alone, right? He's obviously in the team as a backup keeper, but his batting has been so good that he's found himself in at number 6. So I think it's going to be a testing series for him, because again, Sarfaraz Khan, he's played well against spin in the past. He's performed well for India in the past. You could call him unlucky for not being in India's test team. So if Jurel is not able to perform, you could see a scenario where Sarfraz Khan comes in that second test. So I think Jurel's spot is under pressure as well. The rest of the batting unit, I don't see any issues there. I think even if the rest fail, they're still going to play both tests.
Now, looking at sort of ahead at sort of the series specifically, how do you look at sort of the key battles and how do you look at Team India winning? Obviously, you have 2 big scenarios there. Obviously, the Gale pitch and obviously Kuldeep Yadav coming in as well. So a lot of good storylines coming in. What are your thoughts on sort of India's best options and India's key battles for India to win to get the series?
Yeah, I think the battles will come down to how India plays the spinners, the Sri Lankan spinners. So you have Prabhat Jayasuriya. You're probably going to have Mahesh Theekshana to deal with. Ramesh Mendis is one of the newer spinners on the Sri Lankan Test team. So it really comes down to how they navigate the spin of Sri Lanka and be able to score big, and also maybe try to avoid batting last on these wickets. And the toss, it's going to come down to the toss too, because you generally find in Sri Lanka the pitches deteriorate, and it does get harder to bat in the 4th innings. So that's going to be a factor that plays in throughout the series. In terms of specific matchups, even how Jaiswal and KL perform at the top, because the Sri Lankan team, they may be considered a mid-tier team. Like they haven't done the best off late. I know they had a series in West Indies where I believe they tied that series. They have some up and coming players, and they have some experience in the batting lineup as well. But the fast bowling I believe it's Asita Fernando who leads the attack. And then they have a couple of faster bowlers like Dushmanta Chamira, and then there's another guy who slips my mind. But they have some pace there. I don't know. I don't know if they have the same skill set as India's fast bowlers. So that'll be an interesting matchup as well. But between the spinners of both teams, I think that's where it's going to be super interesting because skill wise, I would say both spinners are on par with each other, given the fact that India's spinners, apart from Jaddu, are more inexperienced, right? So
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think even focus on this on the spin department there. We saw Kuldeep Yadav as well, looking decent in the World Cup matches, at least getting his reps in. I think the key point here is looking at someone like Manav Suthar coming in. I think if you look at Sri Lanka, they have I think it's about 6 or 7, I think, left-handers. So they're obviously looking
yes.
at it from a left-handing perspective as well. So that's another key option of why they may include Manav Suthar coming in as a spinning option. But it'll be interesting. I'm very intrigued to see how he fits in because he's one of those players who looks like he could fit into the test lineup, just the way he comes in, just the way he bowls. He seems like a very accomplished red ball player.
Yeah, and he showed that against Afghanistan too with his 6 for test debut, right? And he looks a handful with the bat too. So it seems like a very good option to go with to pair up with Jaddu. The only thing there is you're getting more of the same with the two of them
Yeah.
because they're both left arm spinners, right? Whereas with Saransh Jain, who we should talk a little bit about as well, that that will be interesting if he plays because he's an off spinner, so you get something different. And also, if you play him out of Sitar, you're not looking at 3 left arm spinners, although they are different styles. You're looking at 3 left arm bowlers, right? With Kuldeep also being a left arm bowler, although yes, he's a wrist spinner, so completely different. So I have a feeling we may actually see Saransh Jain play because to your point about having left-handers, you'd want to have someone that can take the ball away. You obviously have Kuldeep Yadav in there that can take the ball away, but then Jaddu and Manav would bring the ball in to the left-handers, right? So probably if you have that many left-handers, you probably need another spinner taking it away.
No, that's a very good point there. So coming in now, looking at sort of Jaddu coming in, Jaddu is going to be a big option coming back from his tennis elbow injury. To your point there, Jaddu will be very important from a batting department as well. We know obviously Dhruv Jurel is still trying to, get his runs up to speed, basically based on sort of the expectation that Dhruv Jurel has. But Jaddu coming in, and as you rightly mentioned, now coming from the bowling aspect as well, I think India may rely on him from a batting department because we know how Jaddu plays on these sort of pitches. This is something that he's done his entire career. And, coming into sort of bat in these conditions is something that I'm looking forward to seeing Jaddu do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the sword come out. That's for sure. That's gonna be a lot of fun. I have a feeling he also has a point to prove because he hasn't played in a while, and there've been a lot of talk about, hey, it's time to move on from Jaddu. I always feel when there's this conversations about players like Jaddu and just athletes in general, when there's naysayers out there, they always want to prove them wrong. So I feel like we might see a good series from him. And there's also been conversation that he's not as effective with the ball, right? We saw that in England where Washi showed him up a few times in that series, and he didn't have the same impact as we're used to seeing, right? So I have a feeling this break may have rejuvenated him, and we may see a completely different Jaddu here in these 2 tests.
You know what? So you actually raised a really good point, looking at it, especially looking at it from a bowling perspective, because historically, India would have been like, okay, what other options they have from, a bowler like Jaddu? But as we pointed out earlier in our podcast, India has those options now, or at least early options to play around with. So to your point there, Jaddu needs to really step up now, especially with a lot of players coming in from the periphery, or like even players that, because we know this Team India team now is not shy of trying to develop players, of trying to put players over experienced players. I'm not trying to point names, but it doesn't seem like it's any issue pushing players out. So yeah, definitely Jadeja would definitely want to feel like he would want to perform, especially from a bowling perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and you talked about players and the choice of players that India have been choosing. You got to talk about Saransh Jain. So I have never heard about him previous to his selection, and he's 33 years old, which caught my attention, which tells me that India are still rewarding, or the selection committee is still rewarding performances regardless of your age. And that was telling, because that just shows that anybody else who may be considered quote unquote on the older side, they still have a shot if they put up numbers.
Yeah, no, and that's I think something that India, even the new administration has always been trying to push that domestic sort of circuit. But yeah, interesting to see him come in. I think what you pointed out about his age is such an important thing to point out because a lot of people sometimes, you know, think that they have no more prospect anymore. Or, sometimes don't push as hard. But hey, you get rewarded in domestic, and that seems great. And even on the flip side as well, we've seen Sarfaraz Khan toil in the domestic circuit as well. Even him coming back after a few years is also a positive light for everyone involved.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's another good point that you made about Sarfaraz Khan. It's good to know that they're still focused on performances regardless of age and other off-field situations. There's been talk about Sarfaraz Khan and his fitness and everything, but there's been images of how he's changed that as well, right? So they're rewarding the hard work that players are putting on the field and off the field as well. So that's really hard thing to see. And I really hope that Saransh ends up debuting. That'll be an awesome story, dude. You can only imagine him toiling all those years in domestic cricket, majority of his cricketing career, right? Because you'd say what a cricketing career you average your play time until what 35, 36, if you're lucky. So for him to have that faith in himself and belief that his day will come and to continue performing and working hard to improve to eventually get that selection. I think that shows a lot about his mindset and his belief in himself.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, obviously, looking at the flip now very quickly, looking at some of Sri Lanka's batting threat options there, Pathum Nissanka, Kusal Mendis, and Dinesh Chandimal, on home surfaces especially. I think one classy players, technical players, especially Nissanka, I would love to see him and maybe the matchups that he'll bring up for Team India. But, how do you see them faring out in terms of in defense of India's attack?
I feel like you say, with every team that plays India, they tend to raise their level because they realize how big of an opportunity this is. And I feel the same thing is going to happen in Sri Lanka. Padam Nisaka is going to be fun to watch. Kusal Mendes and Dinesh Chandimal are my two stalwarts that I would probably, if I was Sri Lanka, I'd be relying on them for
Yes.
runs. I know Dinesh Chandimal, he's an OG now. He's what, 38, 39? Like, all right. So I remember when he was first in the team, when he first came in his young 20s, back when Sangakkara, Jawander were towards the end of their career. So it's cool to see him still part of Sri Lanka and still able to retain his spot in Sri Lanka. So I feel like those three batters are going to be the key if Sri Lanka have to go anywhere in this series with regards to putting up scores.
Yeah, no, really good point. And we hope that, India, obviously, my perspective, India should win, and obviously a fan of India as well. But you definitely want to see Sri Lanka put up, competitive game and, actually put up some runs. An interesting fact to point out here is I believe it's SLC free entry for the test in Sri Lanka. I think this is coming on the back of low turnout in the Lanka Premier League. So hopefully, this test series here rejuvenates a little bit of love of cricket in Sri Lanka. We know how important they are to world cricket, but it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully, a couple of good performances that get the home squad cheering for. But hopefully, India is able to put on some performances as well.
I'm so happy they're doing the free entry because it's not test cricket in Sri Lanka if you don't have the classical Sri Lankan tunes in the background with the trumpet and the drums. So
And
I'm
people
looking
love
forward.
sport.
I'm looking forward to that with the black crows in the back flying over the skyline near the beaches. All right, so switching gears into what's going on in England. So Fleming is in. Stephen Fleming is the new coach of the English cricket, the test team. And Joe Root, after a spell of captaincy and then coming back as an interim captain, is now the permanent captain at least till the next Ashes. What was your immediate reaction when you found that news? I know it's a little old now, but it's still important to talk about.
First thing, I'm like, oh, a Kiwi for a Kiwi. Are you kidding me? Like, where are the coaches in England, right? Again, Stephen Fleming, we've seen his sort of his tenure as a coach, as well as being part of the IPL. I believe he's very well respected among the circuit. But yeah, interesting to see him. I guess initially I did not see his name floating around. I think some of the names floating around were some of the more high profile names, but hey, ECB is doing what ECB wants to do, so good on them. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he sort of comes in. And again, all we heard about in Test cricket for England last couple of years was Bazball. Let's see what Flemball looks like, or whatever acronym they got now.
Is that what it is?
You heard it here first, but no, interesting to see there. Now, the Joe Root thing. All honestly, I think it's a step back for England. I 100% do. I think, first of all, Joe Root's a great captain, but he made it very clear that captaincy was not for him. He was batting a lot better without his captaincy badge. And now with the unfortunate circumstances, he's kind of been pushed towards accepting sort of this, again, it's a great honor, don't get me wrong, but he's kind of been pushed towards getting this. It just goes to show that maybe there was some misalignment when it comes to Ben Stokes and the administration on sort of the succession of captaincy for Team England. You had Harry Brook there, he was sort of being risen up. I hope this does not affect Harry Brook's confidence, because a confident Harry Brook batting is a sight to see. But yeah, I just hope to see that. I think it'll be very interesting to see how the first series plays out. I think they're playing Pakistan next week, so that'll be a very, very interesting series to watch.
Yeah, we'll come back to Joe Root and the captaincy there. Going back to Stephen Fleming, I myself was caught off guard a little bit because his names definitely didn't do the round. But then it's interesting that CSK released him, or he parted ways with CSK right around that time, and then within a few weeks he's England coach. You wonder what came first, right? Chicken or the egg? But apparently he was let go first, and it was perfect timing that the England job was available. So it's interesting to see what happened there. But I think his time with CSK was up. Does that say something about Dhoni? Separate podcast, I guess. But he spent 18 years coaching franchise cricket only. Right, I believe he's coached some of the other associated CSK teams, like the ones in South Africa and whatnot. But he hasn't coached Test cricket, which is super interesting. But it is very much like England to just try something that hasn't been tried before, or that's rarely tried, right? You generally want to pick a coach that has the experience in that format. Now, maybe they lean on Stephen Fleming, the Test player, right? Because he's played many tests for New Zealand. He's been a captain of New Zealand, a very good captain of New Zealand. One of the GOATs in New Zealand from a captaincy standpoint, one of the GOAT left-handers in New Zealand as well as a batter. So it's going to be interesting to see how he carries his tactics in with England, the Test team. But what they've also been talking about is he seems to have a very strong relationship with Brendan McCullum, which means that there's going to be a lot of synergy there. But at the same time, it raises the question, if you are still going to be in touch or try to have some synergy with the person that you sacked because you wanted something new, are you really going to get something new?
That's an interesting point. That's a very interesting point. Yeah, I think that's going to be a little murky, his already established relationship with Brendan McCullum. But I think a part of it, which again, we'll see how it plays out. I think part of the reason for his coming over to England now is maybe perhaps a culture that he was able to instill in CSK. Now, we know that the culture at CSK, from an owner's perspective, management perspective, coach's perspective, it's culture there seems like everyone wants to play for CSK. I think it's not a culture where people want to leave. It's not where you're getting blamed. I think a big part of that was probably Stephen Fleming. And let's just see, maybe that was part of the reason why he needs to come back to England now and maybe help establish a little bit of that culture, a little bit of, that focus, a little bit of that, not going to Noosa partying till 3 a.m. sort of culture. maybe that's part of why he got selected for this role.
Yeah, it could be it. What's interesting is that he's not going to be taking over until the South Africa series later in the year. So even the series against Pakistan is going to be coached by Marcus Trescothick. And part of me wonders why someone like Marcus Trescothick didn't end up getting the job, right? It's interesting how they came to that decision, but it's gonna be. I feel like all the decisions they make is with the Ashes in mind, right? And I think that's probably what they care about the most. And I feel if they wanted to make a coaching change, they should have done it after the previous Ashes, when the one in Australia where England lost, which they probably should have performed better at, and part of the blame was pointed at Brendan McCullum, right? And there was a lot of talk about whether he still keeps his spot. He ended up keeping his spot, but only for a series, which now, if you look at it, denied England getting a coach for the start of the summer.
Yeah.
And now they're not even getting a coach for their summer. They're getting a coach for the winter. And you have Ashes, the next Ashes coming up in England less than a year away. So, timing standpoint, they probably should have made that decision earlier to have a smoother transition. But hey, it's England. You never know what you get with them. So let's see how it goes. Now, switching to the captaincy, going back to what you were saying about Joe Root, I think that the reason why they went back to Joe Root is because, as we've talked about in other podcasts, they don't have an option. There's Harry Brook, which there's a lot of talk about being an all format captain is not easy. There's also talk about he may not be the best Test captain right now. So they didn't have anybody else to select from, and part of that is probably not entirely their fault, because they did have Ollie Pope and Zach Crawley, who could have been potential captaincy candidates. Ollie Pope was vice captain for a long time, right? But then they didn't do themselves justice by not being in the best of batting form, and they ended up losing their spots, right? So you lost two quote unquote experienced players that would have probably been in line for captaincy. So you could argue and say that they probably wasn't probably England's fault completely. It just happened to turn out that way.
I think
What do you think of that?
that's definitely an argument there, but I think definitely it definitely comes down to a lack of succession planning. You need to have plans in place in case someone gets sacked, right? In case something happens. Now, in this case, you kind of knew hopefully back in December, so the last Ashes, that maybe Harry Brooks' antics is not someone you want to put forward as England Test captain. I think he had an incident in New Zealand when he captained there. I think there was obviously incidents in Australia. Now, fast forward, almost a year later, sure, you've made the conclusion that you're not going to push Harry Brook in for captaincy this year, but maybe you should have made a call end of Ashes that, hey, we're going to be switching things around. We're going to, as you mentioned, back Brandon McCullum, and we're going to look to maybe work at maybe Jacob Bethel becoming captain, put him as vice captain, right? And have Joe Root as captain. There's definitely things you could have done from a vice captaincy perspective after the Ashes. As you rightly pointed out, what they should have done for the coach, I think they could have done after the Ashes as well for vice captain, for the vice captaincy. But again, it comes down to exactly as you said, no other options. Joe Root is the best option, and let's be real, he's nice. He's too nice. He's not going to say no.
Well, as an opposition, I don't think you're getting intimidated the same way seeing a C beside Joe Root versus seeing a C beside someone like a Ben Stokes, right?
Yeah.
You know what you're getting with Joe Root. At the same time, there's been conversations and chat that Joe Root is a different Joe Root now than he was before the Stokes captaincy era, and when Joe was captain before. I remember his batting completely fell off when he was captain, especially at the back end of his captaincy career. I believe his stat is one win in the last 18 Test matches that he's been captain. So it tells a little bit about how he left as a captain, right? Or how he did towards the end of his captaincy there. and his scoring, his runs weren't there to back him up either. Having said that, Joe Root is now taking over captaincy again, being in arguably the best form of his life, the best form of his cricketing career. So we may get a different Joe Root. We're also getting a Joe Root as captain after going through this Bazball era, right? So maybe he picks up on some of the tactics and some of the decisions that were made and sort of like makes it his own, where he adds his own layer of, when I think of Joe Root, I think of patience, calm, the ability to stand against the pressure without getting too emotional, right? So maybe he adds that layer to the team that maybe the team needs right now.
That's actually a very good point. Maybe it does sort of taper a little bit of what Bazball was into something that's a little more palatable and balanced for Team England going forward. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. And hey, look, I love Joe Root, the batsman, but hey, if there's anything that stops him from beating Sachin Tendulkar's record for batting, why not? Let it be this captaincy.
All right, so let's get into our 60-second segment. Some fast and punchy questions. Quick fire. All right, so start with the first one. Does India win the Galle Test?
Yes, 100%.
All right. Okay, I'm with you there as well. I think the spinners are going to cash in. And that leads to the next question. Does Kuldeep Yadav take 10 or more wickets in the series?
Yes, I think Kuldeep Yadav is definitely at least getting one fifer for sure. But yeah, he will definitely get at least 10 wickets this series.
I'm going to say no to that. So I'm going with Jadeja. I think Jadu has a point to prove with the ball. We may see a big performance from Jadu with the ball. Does England beat Pakistan in the first test?
Yes, easily. I think England is a strong squad, irrespective of Ben Stokes being there or not. I know Pakistan had a decent tour in West Indies, but I definitely think England got the upper hand for the first test in England. What about you? What are your thoughts on that series?
I think Pakistan's taking the first test. I don't know. I just feel like going against the grain. But Pakistan has had a decent series against West Indies. They tied the series. The first test they didn't do that well. The second test they did pretty good. They ended up winning that one, and I think they carry some of that confidence into this. England are still in the spot of bother. They have a slightly inexperienced team. They have an interim coach, a renewed captain, I guess, if you will. So it's funny because you have two teams with two captains that were previously captains before that have come back to captaincy. I'm looking forward to that series. It should be a fun one. And next up, so does Fleming make an immediate impact, or does England continue to struggle in the post-Bazball era? Do we see Flem ball?
No, I'm saying England will continue to struggle. I think England is going to be a little bit unsure of what their identity is. I think there's going to be still a few players coming in and out. I still think England will struggle initially for sure.
Awesome. And listeners, let us know in the comments who you believe is going to be the winner of the India versus Sri Lanka Test series. It's going to be a fun one. We can't wait to bring it to you. Until the next episode, that stumps.